How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to part 4 of our training video from reactionary to reputation. And this is going to be when we are starting to build a presence, when the rookie is starting to understand the difference between being a policy enforcer to a cultural anchor. Now, guys, I would recommend that you watch the other 3 videos that we've done so far. This is a 10-part series. So again, this is video number 4. But it's definitely important that you do watch the videos prior, because we're going to talk about everything from reactionary, because that's the first step a rookie goes through. We've discussed the shift, and now we're at that part where they're starting to build a presence. So, Russ, you don't mind introducing yourself again?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I started my career all the way back in 1989 at San Quentin State Prison. I've also worked as a senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail and a local county probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, which is on Facebook, and it's a group that's dedicated to the brave men and women of correctional law enforcement and all correctional workers. Great stuff there with support and content and training and camaraderie.
All right, so now we'll move forward. So again, this is about building a presence from policy enforcer to cultural anchor. So basically, the rookie no longer walks into the unit wondering if they'll be tested. They walk in knowing that they will set the tone. This is the moment many rookies don't see coming. It's not a promotion. It's not a pat on the back. It's not even something anyone announces. But one day, without realizing it, they stop reacting to the environment and they start shaping it. They're not hunting infractions. They're guiding expectations. They move beyond the frantic enforcement of early months, past the doubt of discretionary decisions, and into something much steadier: presence. It's quiet, unshakable, commanding, but without the bark. Where once they relied on rules to claim their space, now their presence fills it. Russ, how do you define presence in a correctional setting, and how does it differ from authority that's based purely on position or volume?
I think that's a really great, way to look at things. It's a great question in that, there's a difference between that rookie that, walks onto the tier, that walks onto the yard, and that seasoned professional veteran of the prison or of the jail or whatever type of correctional facility it is. When you're in the position of being a rookie, you really don't understand that, because you have no way to see things from the perspective of the veteran, of the seasoned officer. Your only experience comes from what you've known up to that point. Looking back now, I can really see, I can really feel, I really know and understand what that difference truly encompasses. There were many times, I'm not saying this, not trying to, clap myself on the back, but there were many instances where I knew that my presence had either stopped something, and, many times it was, it could be, an attack, an assault. I know that many times my presence, as opposed to someone who's new, caused inmates to make mistakes with regards to their contraband. It is a different feeling, a different vibe that the inmates give off when they know you by reputation, when they know and can predict what you do, not in a good way, but in a bad way. They know that you're going to take action. They know that you are going to seize control of what's going on. And so it's an entirely a different vibe that happens, reciprocally between the two sides there, between the inmates. and the staff. And with the rookie, they're just kind of put in the position that they just happen to be there, and inmates react differently to them. And it's just something that almost truly has to be experienced.
Yeah, I agree, Russ. I think as we've been doing these videos, if you notice at the very beginning, you're leaning on policy, you're leaning on support, and then eventually you're transitioning to leaning on yourself. So your presence matters, your tone matters, because this is the confidence that has now come from within because you've done the trials, you went through the mistakes, and now you're starting to find your way, which is great. I would love to think that this video or these series of videos matter because it's given people something at the very beginning that they know that they can go ahead and aim towards. I think that's the problem right now with training in corrections, because they don't have anything where someone can progress towards it. They leave it as a lot of ambiguity, sadly. But with that said, we said many shows before that we've done on Tier Talk, but now for the training, the uniform, the rank, the position, you cannot lead by that your whole career. You cannot enforce rules and regulations by that, because in the world that we work in, none of that matters. What matters is who you are, how you carry yourself in the long term. And I think, Russ, and I'm sure you'll agree, because this is also you're setting the tone, but there'll be some people to test you, to try to bring you back a level or two. But I think what matters most here is consistency, because you're looking inwards now, you're building confidence, and you're trying to stand on your own. So this consistency in your effort to do that is also an effort to reinforce your foundation if you're being challenged. So do you agree consistency is big on this?
So you have to start with consistency, but consistency, has to be backed by forward progress. If you were to, totally take it to consistency, it would just mean that you're just doing the same thing. And doing the same thing only leads to stagnation. It only leads to complacency. So you have to go beyond, just that consistent framework, and you have to be consistently better each and every day. It doesn't have to be by leaps and bounds, but there must be at least, an incremental crawl, going from, satisfactory to excellence.
Yeah, I really like the context that you just said. I love that, the consistency and the forward progress. You're right. That's why we have these discussions, guys. That's why we do these training videos, because we don't just give you something at a surface level. I love how Russ. Oh, hold on, got my coffee. Thank you. I'm sorry, the audience can't hear you. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, she doesn't want to come on camera. She's in her robe. All right, so let's move forward. So I got when authority evolves into influence. So at this stage, the officer's authority no longer comes from the rule book. It comes from reputation, the kind built day by day, moment by moment, in how they carry themselves and how they respond when it counts. They don't need to be loud. Their presence carries weight. They don't rely on policy to settle every situation. They rely on judgment. They don't walk the unit hoping not to be tested. They walk the unit knowing that even if they are, they can handle it with calm, credibility, and clarity. Their authority has shifted from positional to relational. And that's the most powerful form of control corrections has to offer. Guys, I forgot to mention, don't forget, if you want more about what we're covering right now, this book is already out on the market. And this is it right here. From reaction to reputation. You can find that on Amazon right now. And it's going to cover everything we're covering, because that's what I'm reading from now, including the videos we have yet to cover, which will be happening. We're trying to do these weekly. There's a lot here. So, Russ, I do got a question for you. Why is relational authority so much more effective in corrections than positional authority? Can you share examples where relational credibility shifted the outcome of a tense situation?
Certainly. I think, like, when we look at, the difference between that relational authority and, just with, if you only have the badge on your chest to back you up, I think that one thing that the public and us, maybe at the beginning of our career, really see and give deference to is the weight of that badge. We are, we as citizens, we as productive members of society, we as people who do not have antisocial criminal personality types, we give deference to that badge. We get pulled over. We're generally, very courteous. We go through the process. We're not oppositional or defiant with regards to the officer, and that does not tend to exist within the correctional system. These inmates tend to be completely desensitized to what the badge means, to what any rank on your collar is. They've been, oppositional and defiant, and even to the point of violence in many cases against, peace officers of all stripes. So, what is it that matters about you walking that floor? It really becomes much more about, and I will say this, you talk about, relational here. Well, relational has to go directly back to what's, installed and projected in the individual, because they kind of, see that sea of green or whatever color your particular facility wears as, just a mass of sameness. It's different when you come in and they do finally know who you are. They've had interactions with you, and they know that you're all about that business. And I've seen many times, where that was the final thing. I've seen officers come in and be really good about de-escalating situations. I've seen officers come in that could do things where they were, sorting out the situation, possibly through escalation, because believe it or not, both are absolutely necessary in what we do. And I've seen many times, and been present and been lucky enough to be good enough, in my estimation, to pull that off. Where because of my presence, not the presence of my uniform, not the presence of my badge, not the presence of my title, not the presence of my authority as it comes from the penal code, but been there to be the one to sort out that final thing. And I'll tell you, there's been instances where, you see them just kind of like, well, maybe we give up this time, but next time, and tacitly implying that, no, not so much in reality, but those staff that are able to project their authority, project their ability, project their competence in what they're doing, makes a huge difference versus maybe on any given day, perhaps having a bunch of rookies run the place. Because instantly you see the difference, and it's not the rookie's fault. It's the fact that rookies have no chance at owning any type of a reputation. They don't have much of a chance at being able to know what the difference is, and they are just inexperienced. And so that's why we're doing this particular video amongst the rest of those in the series, to try and, shortcut rookies, to have a shorter path to become more expert and become more adept in a quicker, shorter amount of time. And, just give them some clues as to how to conduct themselves.
Yeah, and guys, I want to make sure we know positional authority does not work at any level in corrections. The initial impression or impact of the badge or the uniform is non-existent in corrections, because you're walking into a world where that's been established long before you've even been in existence. So we rely more on who we are, and that's why we added reputation. I think one of the difference between us and law enforcement on the streets is that we have more frequent contact with our public. So they start to understand who we are as an individual outside of the uniform because we are in frequent contact with them. And I think that is why we say from reactionary to reputation, where if I was looking at a law enforcement officer on the streets, I mean, yes, reputation matters, but I don't know if I'm having that same amount of contact with a street officer as an inmate would with a correctional officer. That's why we kind of really focus on who you are and how that's perceived way outside the position. And I like what Russ said, because when we talk about relational, there is a professional relationship here. And that professional relationship is, I got to lean on what Russ said about that context, that consistency in regards to being progressive into who you need to be. And at this point here, you are working on that relational credibility in the context of your professional expectations. Because me and Russ don't like to use the word rapport because rapport seems to be pretty conditional, but there are some people that like that word. So I would say if that's the word you relate to, just relate it in the context that I just said. It's professional credibility in who you are. Can I trust you to perform your role? That's the key. And I think, believe it or not, inmates do have that expectation of us. I mean, they may break the rules, but they expect us to, be right on them and question them and challenge them. So I think that this is a great thing to embrace. And for me, I could tell you right now, I led my career dealing with inmates with trying to build professional relationships through expectations, which later became my reputation and what I was about. And when I say position, we talked about position in regards to rank, the badge, whatever it is. But there is another position I would like to mention, and it's not here in the question here, but could be seen, is the position of where you stand. The professional credibility we talk about, the progressive consistency, which I like. And again, in the context of progressive, what you're aiming towards. And I think that matters, because if inmates understand where you stand in the moment, what you value, what you accept as boundaries, this actually helps you form that reputation, because it's going to be a battle, because you're going to deal with the challenges that try to break those. But if you stay rooted in that position at that point, if you stay founded in that strength to stick by your principles, to stick by your values, you'll find that your reputation will wind up literally walking in before you walk into a room. And it just, that's what we're talking about. That's the quiet expectations, the established expectations, where when you walk in, everything speaks loudly without you having to say a word. And I'm sure Russ would agree with that. All right, let me get to the. Oh, go ahead, Russ. You got something?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know. Let me give one particular story, on the difference between, what it may be like to be a rookie. And, this is just, one thing that happened to me. But, I was in my last little hoorah, let's just put it that way. I think it was, in the last, couple of weeks of my career, we were experiencing a lot of, contraband on the yard. And when you're experiencing a lot of contraband, it's usually, can be traced back potentially to dirty staff. But the main thing is they just have, absolutely no regard for the system. They have no regard for the staff. And in this one particular situation, I mean, I was really known for digging up the contraband, and they worked to get away from me. They worked to not do things, obviously, on the shifts where I was assigned there. And in this instance, I was just walking through, and I don't think they knew that I was there at that time, because it was not the shift that I normally worked. And as I keyed myself into this area where there was a day room, you could just see the look. You could just see the look on their eyes, and everything, went completely silent. And so I kind of, looked around in there a little bit and just like walked on through like nothing was going on. And then right at that next moment, we were getting ready to feed them. And so as they came out, I got some backup there, and we patted everyone down that came out of there, and I just knew that there was something really out of order there, and I knew it wasn't like normal contraband or something like that. And I went back in, and it took me a long time, just looking around, not getting involved in any kind of searches or anything immediately, to where I thought I identified what was going on. And so I ended up, and it took me a long time. I had to unscrew this light fixture, and it was really put together well. I mean, they put all of the little screws and stuff back together, but I finally got it open, and took a whole bunch of brand new, literally brand new, cell phones out of there that still have that sticker on the front, the one that peels away but looks like it's really part of the smartphone and stuff. And without them being fearful of my abilities and the way I conduct myself and the amount of contraband that I was taking away from them, there would have been no way I could have been clued into that. And so it was their mistake and their bad. And like I say, don't like to pat myself on the back, but that's one of the things that a reputation can really help you with in dealing with inmates. And I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. You actually gave me an idea for a show topic later on. Just remind me, text me after this, because I have a great idea for a show topic, but this is about our lesson. But hey,
Okay.
I want to mention, you gave me an idea for a great show topic. Hey, I just want to mention something too, to kind of piggyback something in this section. Remember, guys, we're moving from creating to maintaining. So creating, it's hard, it's reactionary, but so is maintaining. And I think once in a while you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to maintain? That goes back to looking at what you have created. And I think that does matter, because sometimes we can get a little lost in our ways, but we have to be very careful not to forget. Like, I got to go with that context with Russ, with that consistent in that progressive manner, because I want to make sure that if I'm starting on the right path, am I maintaining something that continues to have value, or have I strayed? Because I see it happen all the time. I see people wind up falling back, and then they're chasing after again. It's like, hey, you're falling back. You got to get yourself ready to, keep yourself moving forward. That's why I love that North Star. I think our rookies need that. Our rookies are not given that direction. And I think that matters when it comes to this transition from creating to maintaining. What am I maintaining? Where am I going? And that's why I think these videos are extremely important. So what does this stage look like? You'll know an officer has reached this point now by what they say, you'll know an officer has reached this point not by what they say, but by what happens around them. Inmates self-correct before the officer has to say a word. That's not fear, it's respect. Peers ask their opinions on issues, not because of rank, but because of consistency. Shifts run smoother when they're present. Even the difficult days feel less chaotic. Their interventions are minimalist. A glance, a quiet word, a raised eyebrow, nothing wasted. They're not just holding the line, they are the line. And their reliability has become a stabilizing force in the housing unit's culture. So, Russ, hold on, where is it? Let me read this question here. What are some visible signs that an officer has transitioned from enforcement to presence? And how do inmates and staff respond differently at this stage?
So that is, really rooted and embedded in the reputation that they've been able to cultivate in themselves up to that point. And I think that what you really tend to see is you get tested a lot less. There's a lot more reluctance in trying to engage and verbally overpower. There are inmates that and it's always a test. I'm trying to figure out how to put this. But what they will do is they will be so persistent as to try and wear you down. And and that tends to happen a lot when you're in a position where they get to know you or know of your reputation. There's a lot less of that because they know that they're not going to be successful. They know that you are going to do something about it. They know that you are going to put them back in their place, and they come to realize that it's not worth their time and effort because they can always go and shop for some other staff member. And so I would say that is the one thing that you can really see is just that the inmates don't even bother to try with you anymore. You're mute.
Just typing in the question because I don't know what happened. I lost the question, but we're okay. It's a training video. It happens. Mistakes happen. Thank God you have a good memory, Russ. So I have to agree with everything Russ said. Obviously, this is where if I was a supervisor and I was looking to understand where the rookie officer is at, or maybe a peer looking at the rookie officer, I do agree. I look at the environment. I would. I think if I'm a supervisor, or again, a peer, control does come from looking at the environment and seeing if the environment is kind of running. I don't want to say autopilot because there's influence there, but I would say I would look at to see, if there's some influence. If I walk in as a supervisor and I see a unit that's in disarray, obviously the first person I go to is the officer running the unit. Or if I was a peer, same thing. Hey, your unit's a little sloppy now. Remember, the unit's a reflection of your influence. So I do think the first thing I would look at is the environment to see what the environment's telling me. And to be honest with you, I think that's a great perspective here, Russ. I think the environment could definitely tell you where that rookie is at in the moment. I think that matters because, again, if you're doing those surprise tours as a supervisor, maybe even a peer, as a mentor, checking in on the individual, the environment is definitely something where if I'm walking in, I'm looking to the left, I'm looking to the right, and I'm saying, okay, hey, come here. Let me tell you what I see here. And then that can kind of tell you where that influence is, because influence can be seen besides being felt. It definitely can be seen besides being felt. Okay, Russ.
I was going to say, so the second thing that I really look for, that's the change of that thing is a new level of autonomy, where that person is, not reliant on supervision. I mean, they should still, maintain contact, communication, and that kind of thing. But they feel, comfortable, at least up to a certain level of what their engagement is going to be with the inmate population. They're not having to go and ask for permission. They're going in there and they're putting themselves in a position where they already are comfortable with what they know that they have to do, and they already understand to a much deeper level of what their supervisor's expectations are, and when they need to contact their supervisor and when they do not need to contact their supervisor. So I would say that is the next level to really look at.
Yeah, and Russ, what's funny? Me I mentored a few individuals, obviously, and I've been a supervisor, obviously, so I look for things as well. And if I had a rookie, I mean, I like to always try to be balanced, because even if I have something that I see that I don't like, I may not introduce myself with that negative. I may introduce myself with something positive to the individual to kind of note what they're doing right. And then that opens up something where I may be able to notice, tell them about other things I've noticed that could be a little bit better. But we started on a good foundation, so the person appreciates that, and then most likely will be welcome to a little bit more of constructive criticism. But I think there's also a shift too, where eventually as a mentor, as a supervisor, instead of you walking in looking at what's wrong, you start to really see what's being done right. And then that becomes the main focus, to the point where, like it says here, how do inmates and staff respond differently at this stage? I think there are sometimes, if I'm a supervisor and I'm a peer and I'm looking to learn as well, sometimes I may even go in and say, and I think this is true regardless of time or experience, hey, I like how you did that. When how did you do that? Or, what was your thoughts behind what you just did? Or, hey, you had a response. I love how you responded to that emergency. Hey, let me know a little bit about, what was your thought process? And it's not really judgment. I'm actually curious because maybe there's something after my 22 years and change that I didn't see, because we all have different perspectives. And when I start trusting the person in their efforts, when I start trusting their contribution, that's key. I may start to find myself once in a while learning from them. And I think there is a shift. And as for the inmates, you're always going to be challenged. You're always going to be challenged. But I think what happens, the more your experience, the more you start having those past successes that are seen by the inmate population, I think they become a little bit more hesitant in challenging you. So I think what happens here, maybe Russ could help me out with this, but I think like if you're more experienced, Russ, like, so let me see if this paints out. When you're in reactionary mode, and I'm just thinking of this right now, when you're in reactionary mode, the inmates are going to have a little level of control, and that's fine, but you're reacting and you're trying to keep things balanced, and that's expected. So they're more about challenging you. That's what's going to happen. But as you start to get more established, now they know, okay, well, you have a footing here, but maybe what they try to challenge, and you're kind of directly involved with this, would be the situation, because situations are tougher for you to control. So if I was an inmate and you're a more experienced officer, situations can happen in which now it exposes a vulnerability. And now I'm not so much challenging you, but I'm going ahead and challenging the situation because now you've been impacted by that. And then eventually it becomes towards you. And I think that does make sense. If I'm new, the inmates will start attacking me, which makes a lot of sense because I'm vulnerable and I'm trying to figure out a path. But once I start to establish myself, I have a thicker shield. But sometimes the shield goes down through certain situations that may be out of my control. So now the inmate may pounce on that and take advantage of the situation. Does that make sense for us at any level?
Yeah, it can. I would just say this. Inmates have limited resources, limited amount of time, limited amount of effort that they can maybe throw energy into any one thing. When you're better at doing the job, they're more likely to avoid it. Now, if you're already in the situation, if you're already part of it, they may have to throw some type of energy your way. Some type of manipulation, some type of resistance, some type of defiance. Whatever it is. Maybe they're just straight trying to hustle you with some words or something. But that's all part and parcel. The difference with a rookie is more likely to be viewed by them as potentially, not totally, but potentially exploitable. They want to take advantage of the difference in that gap of experience and proficiency. That's the way I would put it.
No, Russ, I agree with you 100%. I do. This is great because we never really discussed this before, so it's great to see what comes out of it because I agree with that, and I think within the context of what you're saying, because I agree with you 100%. I think there's also like when we tell our senior staffs, hey, I know you've had a good career, whatever, but don't get too comfortable because situations happen. And you can't control every situation. So that's how you kind of keep things balanced. For the rookie, it's on them. And for senior staff that may think, hasn't happened to me yesterday, it's not going to happen to me today, I'm that good, then I would always tell them, yeah, you can control every situation that comes your way because you can't. So inmates will see how you respond. So the situation becomes, I think, important. But both, I mean, they both play out, obviously. I mean, they both can intertwine. But if I was an inmate, at the very beginning for a rookie, I would focus on who they are because there's a lot of vulnerability there, which may give me more opportunity. But if it's a senior officer, they may be a little bit more established. So I may focus on situations that make that person vulnerable. But it can happen both ways within the context of what you're saying. I think that's an interesting dialogue, though. From enforcer to anchor. So in every facility, there are officers people check the roster for, not because they're easy, not because they're feared, but because When they're on duty, things work. That's an anchor. A cultural anchor doesn't have to have stripes. They don't have to make speeches. They just have to be consistent. They carry themselves with such command presence, such fairness that they naturally shape the environment around them. And they're not clinging to rules anymore. They're embodying their purpose. They correct not to prove control, but to preserve structure. They influence not to win respect, but because they've already earned it. Now, Russ, what separates a respected officer from a merely experienced one? And what does it mean to become a cultural anchor in a correctional environment?
I think when we get far enough into what we're doing with regards to our reputation, what we're doing with regards to our experience, what we're doing with regards to going out there, seeking out the challenges that happen every single day within a correctional facility, and redefining those challenges into opportunities. The people that are involved in doing that are those that are really determined to rise to the next level. You'll see officers that are trapped at a lot of different levels. There's some that will never get beyond the most basic functionary type of things. There's others that will become proficient, and they're good at doing one or two things. There's others that are more well-rounded, and you'll identify those individuals because those are the ones that are being tapped to do things. They're the ones that are being tapped to take care of things that are difficult. They're the ones that are being that are asked, hey, we got a situation over here. Can you come over and give us a hand? And you're constantly going from from your area of assignment to go help someone else out in their area of assignment. So that's really for me where the rubber meets the road. When you're being pulled to somewhere else because of your reputation, because people believe that your presence is going to make a difference, that your presence is going to help with a situation, and that your expertise and knowledge is going to redefine what any given incident or potential incident might look like. The kind of thing where your sergeant or your lieutenant looks up from their desk in the middle of what they're doing, and they see you and they're like, oh, thank God you're here. That's where the difference is.
Yeah, and Russ, I love the word anchor because the word anchor is like stabilizer, and I love for people who can come onto a scene and literally through their presence just stabilize the situation or whatever the chaos may be. For me, the respected officer from the merely experienced one. So I think we kind of talked about creation to maintaining. I think the creation is the getting that experience, and then maintaining is what you have to do every day in regards to that respect. All because you have experience doesn't mean, because here's another thing, years in it may equate to experience, but evaluated experience is what matters. I could passively do nothing for 10 to 20 years, and I learn things, of course, because I see it all around me through routine, but that doesn't mean I'm engaged. Or I can get someone who has same amount of time and literally engaged, intentional, evaluate their experiences, and next thing you know, they just are the person that people go to. So, if someone says, well, you should go to Russ because, a question like that, Russ has 29 years in, okay, that's great. And maybe there's a lot of stuff that he learned, but there may be someone out there that only has 2 years in that has been truly intentional in their growth and development. So I wouldn't just judge somebody solely by their time, but rather their intentionality. Because I could also go to Russ, who's 29 years, and the last 15 of it, he's been burned out. So Russ is seeing corrections totally different now. And I don't know that. I'm new. I don't know that. So I'm taking on all the negative assumptions that have formed in Russ's last 15 years of the profession. So I truly do think, and me and Russ always talk about evaluated experiences. Okay, I respect you because you walked the tiers and you've put a certain amount of time in. You got my respect. I get that. And that's more of a respect for the job that you have done, the courage you have, committed yourself to every day to walk that tier. But if I'm looking to grow and develop, I go by just more than just your time in. I need to see the outcome of that growth and development, if that makes sense. I don't want to just go to somebody who has all that time in and, literally half their career, they didn't even challenge themselves. So, it all depends on what you're looking for. But in the long run, if you want my respect, the experience has to be experience that's truly evaluated and truly, I need to see intentionality. I do. And I want to add one more thing, Russ, and I know this makes sense too. I think we all can learn from every level. I think we can learn from each other, even across departments. It's just we all have different experiences that we can learn from. I think for me, as I've grown up in this profession, now on the administrative side, I learn every day from the officers that work that front line, from the staff that work that front line. But the one thing that they all have in common, the ones that I truly learn from, even though I may be at this position, it doesn't matter. I see intentionality in their career. I see contribution. I see effort. I see that they're engaged. And when you go to chat with them, the levels are extremely deep in the dialogue you're having. I remember having a back and forth with somebody, and I let them vent, because that's what you should do to get their perspective. And they kept on bringing it back to very superficial arguments. Now, I don't know if this makes any sense, but I think Russ may understand this. But outside of this profession, me and Russ have donated our time to countless videos or countless hours of videos. I mean, we're over 1,700 videos where there are deep discussions, hours upon hours for mostly just one video, articles, books, whatever we contribute to. I mean, there's a learning process. So when people start to communicate me and it's very surface, if I listen to them, I try not to challenge them. But if they start challenging something that's foundational to me, something that I'm passionate about, that I learned through time, I let them know. And it's kind of a joke, but I still let them. I said, be careful. I said, because I have talked about that discussion 20 million times by now. I'm an influencer. So there is, if you challenge someone like myself or Russ, it's like shocking what comes out of us because of all this stuff that we learned. Because after we have a discussion, we go ahead and we look back and we reevaluate what we said. And Russ may even come back and say, hey, I said that yesterday. Can we do another show on that real quick? Because I have another thought I want to add that I'm sitting on and I have to get out. And the same thing with me. So it's funny how when you get challenged, all of a sudden this influencer can come out of you. And then you express your thoughts and like, oh my God, what was I thinking? It's like, yeah, all because I'm listening and because I'm quiet doesn't mean that I don't have an argument. It's just I'm trying to respect your perspective. So for me, if you want to engage in a dialogue with me, with Russ, you got to come from an experience where you are literally trying to learn. You're actively engaged. I don't want to engage in dialogue with people who are burnt out that don't contribute. I don't want to engage in that dialogue. I just don't think it's worth my time. I want to engage with people who are actively contributing. And yes, you could still be burned out. I get it, but you're burned out because you care so much. And I want to engage with those individuals. So for me, experience matters as long as you are still engaged, you're still active, and the key is intentionality. All right, let me get to the next part, Russ. So discretion, refined beyond the letter of the rule. So again, this is beyond the shifting point now. Now we're going beyond, just following policy and procedure, but rather creating some influence in our own decision making. By now, this officer doesn't hide behind policy. They inhabit it. They know the rules inside and out, not to recite them, but to know where discretion fits within them. And that's key. We talked about that in the episode prior. Remember that, guys. I want you to watch the episode prior because we talk about that specific sentence right there. Well, because you know the rules doesn't mean you're willing to step out when needed to go ahead and make a decision that may be on the outside of that procedure. Because some people will brag about knowing the rules, but they're so rigid that the rules become a crutch. They understand something vital. Rules are the framework. Presence is the execution. So when they apply discretion, it's not arbitrary. It's not a gamble. It's guided by judgment, accountability, and timing. And this is where one of the most underappreciated tools of influence appears. We talked about this. Back end discretion. Back end discretion. So, Russ, why is it important to teach rookies that discretion is not weakness, but rather mastery of the rules? How can supervisors help build this mindset early?
So, this really all comes down to training, and I think it comes down to training, in a few different, formats, if you will. And I think that, those formats have to encompass the letter of what we're doing. We have to look at it, through the lens of, policy, procedure, state law, federal law, and case law. But that's just part of the picture. We also have to, look at it from a practical viewpoint, and then somehow we have to be able to make those two together somewhere within that gray area, if you will. There are no easy, perfunctory actions that take place within managing any population within corrections. And so, if you go in with the expectation that the rule book is your guide, you're going to be sorely mistaken, and you are constantly going to be scrambling to try to figure out how to put things not just back together again, but how to even start your shift. So discretionary decision making, has to bridge the gap between the letter of the law and that which is practical, purposeful, and lawful. Let me just go that far at least. And we have to be able to see how different things interact, and not just rotely be able to spew up, section 3323 of Title 15 or something like that. Because while that's useful, it's also limiting. Because then you're thinking only within that box, of policy, procedure, federal law, state law, and case law. Instead, you need to be thinking, outside the box, and applying the practicality of it within that gray area. And so, I think that that's the best way that I know how to phrase it. It's just something that we have to be cognizant of, and we have to be able to show that rookie, hey, you know what? We should not get caught up in negotiations necessarily, but there are times where we can compromise and put the living situation, the management of the population into a better light, which makes things better for everyone. And I'm not talking about being complacent, and I'm not talking about, ceding authority or just letting them get away with everything like some politicians do. But what I'm talking about is, that hard practicality, and the difference between the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and that practical application. I hope that kind of makes sense. I know I was rambling a little bit, but.
No, there wasn't a ramble there. It makes 100% sense. And guys, I think I'm going to touch on this in the next section real quick, but I want to, it's in my head, so I want to get it out because it does touch on this as well. So I think when you're new, as I said, you're reactionary. So you're very short term in what your resolutions are. It's more about establishing, well, there's some long term there because there's the establishment of authority. You're embracing conflict. So there's some long-term stuff in regards to your growth and development. But it may show up in short-term actions where I'm just going to address an inmate real quick to practice my authority. And you're not really looking for long-term in that behavior, but rather just more about yourself. But ultimately, there is the long-term resolution. That's where this comes in, the back-end discretion. I think that me and Russ have touched on this before anybody else even put a label on it. You can actually see the perfect marriage between short-term solutions and long-term solutions by the loss first gain. I think that's a perfect example of trying to manage both short-term and long-term gains. And I think where we're at in corrections now is the short-term gains are usually what you have to do immediately to establish control. And then eventually you can lean into the long terms. As you start developing your way, you could start to see where they merge, and usually your actions are build the bridge between short term and long term, if that makes sense. So what I would say here for me is that when it gets to the long term stuff, you start to understand how the system works, what the system is expecting of you, and the bigger picture. If I could draw a specific, I got to go back to the loss versus gain, is you take something away, short-term reactionary, sets immediate control, but the long-term goal is giving it back. That's what we have to do. How do you use that to your own strategic advantage? And sometimes people will see that as weakness because they may be stuck in that very reactionary phase where they think that control only comes from what you can take away, and it's not. I think the greater control comes from how you can give it back, and that also aligns or should align with what the agency expects. So that's why I speak both sides. I tell people that if you're going to look to take something away, you have to know how that serves a purpose in the long run. And that's how you're going to give it back. That's always going to be what that is, because that's the way the world is shifting. You just can't take things away and not give it back. And then vice versa. I also tell people on the rehabilitative side, if you want to give it back, you have to make sure that we go through all safety and security measures to, make sure that we're doing it where it does have long-term value. But let's go over this next part, because I don't want to sound redundant, but I just wanted to get that thought out there, because I think that's another thing that we could mention. What we're mentioning now is you're going from short-term to long-term. And that comes more about manage the situation, because at the very beginning, as I mentioned, the long-term value is yes, it sets the template for who you got to be to embrace the authority, but it's reactional to the situation, where eventually when you start doing things long-term, it works more on the situation and less on you, because you've already established you. I'm already created who I need to be. So now I could focus more on the situation. And actually, Russ, when you think about that, it's amazing what we have discussions on. That actually blends very well what we talked about before. Because if I'm working on me at the very beginning, and again, the long-term process is me, it makes sense for the inmates to want to impede that if they're looking to manipulate. They don't want that long-term establishment. So they start attacking me. But then eventually, as I move forward to the back end, where it's more long-term, where I've already been established, I've created who I need to be. Now it's more about maintaining the situation. Now the inmates see the vulnerability in the situation because this person has a shield here. So now I attack the situation because that's where the person may be most vulnerable. That's not a bad, a little deep, but I think that's correct. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you have to take into consideration, the level that the inmates could be at. There are certainly, inmates that do things and look at situations through, long. I will say this, through longer, and extreme long terms. I would say that those inmates tend to be more the outliers, and they tend to be the ones who are, more violent or proven violent because they have longer sentences to do. So that can definitely factor in. I would say that overall, it's probably not the general experience to see that, but it's worth considering and keeping in mind, because we deal with or a lot of us do deal with a wide range of disparate, inmate populations. I know in one day I've gone from, dealing with guys, who, aren't even within a secure perimeter, to death row in a single day. So it is worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, that was actually interesting. I want to go back to back end discretion real quick. We talked about front end in the episode prior. because a lot of people will see back end discretion, the power of giving something back as weakness, but it's not if it's done strategically. And this is very important to understanding how the loss first gain system works. So every officer learns how to take things away. That's the foundation of the loss model. It works. And in many environments, it's necessary. Privileges, program access, conflict items, or comfort items. You remove something to reinforce a boundary. But what most rookies don't learn until much later is this: real influence lives in the restoration. It's not just what you take, it's what you're willing to give back. Let's look at a common scenario. An inmate loses day room for 30 days following a disciplinary incident. The behavior was disruptive but not dangerous. Days pass, weeks pass. The inmate keeps to himself. No new issues, better tone, a few positive gestures. Policy says restoration is allowed with consistent improvement. Now the officer has a choice. Do I stick to the 30 days or do I give this back early and test the progress? This moment isn't just about the inmate. It's about the officer's development, because choosing to restore privileges is an act of leadership. It's a calculated risk that communicates, I see your effort and I'm willing to meet it with some level of trust. Now be careful how I'm using the word trust here. I'm not saying you trust inmates, but having said that, there may be enough to say I'm willing to take the risk because this decision is on me, but I see the improvement. Again, if the person falls back, you still have the effort to take it away. It doesn't guarantee success, but it opens the door to ownership. Now, Russ, how should officers decide when restoration is appropriate? What risk and rewards come with giving something back before the scheduled end?
So I think that what you have to see is you have to see, real actual progress, and an engagement by the individual or individuals with regards to, fixing whatever behavior was wrong, fixing with whatever part of the event was wrong. Giving things back early tends to happen, though, through the use of manipulation tactics a lot. I used to have a supervisor who was always building rapport by giving things back, and it was a real morale buster to people who were, out there, seizing contraband property and things like that. And, it just devolved into this big free for all because the benefits of rapport evaporate the instant you introduce accountability into the equation. So I think that there could be a time and place, for, going with the early effect. But you should really look at it with regards to whether or not that's part of a manipulated effect by the inmate or inmates in that situation. So
sorry.
So I think that, that's just, a good under advisement. It has to be something that you evaluate and think through as to what the actual situation is there, not just like, well, let's give it back. Let's give it a try. And you're just really reacting to the fact that, hey, they're wearing me down. Okay, well, wearing people down is a manipulation tactic. Going and asking the sergeant instead of staff is a manipulation thing, and then the inmates coming back to you, and, well, you know what, we really want the TV back because, the game's going to be on this weekend and we've done so much better. And, every other dorm or, whatever. And so then they're guilting you, because of this or that, really when they're probably, trying to run some kind of a gambling pool or whatever. So that's what I have to say on that.
No, I agree. I want to compliment that. So I obviously you're looking for patterns. I know that a lot of facilities may not keep on permanent record the simple on the spot tickets or the simple on the spot charges, but the unit should. There should be a little personal folder that's more in regards to behavioral management. And, even if I don't work it every day, I could look at a little folder here to see what the pattern is and, decide, based on that pattern, how many chances has this person got. I love having these parameters that the custody staff with maybe a supervisor involved. I don't really. It could just be the officer. It depends on who you're dealing with, because I don't want someone soft just giving it away, like Russ said, because they're being manipulated. But I don't mind exercising some discretion within a certain time frame. Like the person has 30 days loss of something, and maybe that's a good stamp to work with. But if the inmate's not a problem, maybe they had a bad moment and the inmate's really trying, and the officer catches it, and the officer says, you know what, technically you could get 15 days, but today I'll 30 days today, I'll give you a bit of a break. You've been okay. It's not the end of the world. I know back in the day when I first started this job, man, if a guy had a 30-day restriction, or if a woman had a 30-day restriction, if the officer gave them a couple of hours out on the 29th day, it was the end of the world. You're supposed to hold them accountable, and there was no leeway. And I didn't realize how maybe that discretion utilized by that officer, they could have been manipulated, who knows? But I'm just saying, treating it as if they were, and not allowing for some leeway for them to go ahead and maneuver their control. Because my biggest thing is I try to empower the officers. And one of the biggest empowerment for the officers is the ability to not just take things away, but strategically give it back, as long as it's within the as long as it's being used through proper discretion. I think this is the hard part of where we're at now. This is the strategic restoration of how do I give something back, because you don't, if I don't allow for some strategic wiggle room, then the inmates have nothing to motivate them forward. So the officer actually has less to control in the restoration, especially if the inmate has nothing to lose. Now the control comes from how you give it back. And you don't want to manage hopeless inmates. You don't want to manage anybody that's hopeless. So I think as long as it's used properly, there's a way to take restoration and make it very strategic, because then the officer, if it doesn't work, now the officer has something that they can take away again. Russ, you had a thought, because I think did you have a thought on that, or?
Oh no, I just I was just reacting to something that was going on my phone. That guy we talked about was trying to call me back.
Oh, sorry. So, yeah. So I didn't mean it. So I think the key here is there's a fine balance. This is where short-term meets with long-term. And for management, I think you should look at that as well. If there are sanctions, and also, you know what, let's maybe even the more senior officers too. If there are sanctions right now that are definitive, because we don't trust in our officers to have some level of empowerment within some discretion and restoration, we should revisit that. I think that matters a lot, especially in the units that are the more close custody, where they have less privileges to work with. The power does come from how you give things back. So the next part here, Russ, I got is the strategic power of restoration. So again, it's one of the back end discretion. So when back end discretion is applied correctly, it transforms correctional dynamics. It does three key things. One, it builds credibility. So inmates respect officers who are fair, consistent, and courageous enough to admit when progress deserves recognition. You're not soft, you're watching. Encourages growth. If every punishment is fixed, what incentive exists for inmates to improve midway? Restoration provides a target for change. It says you're not stuck, you can move forward, and it models leadership. Peers and junior staff take notice. They begin to ask questions. Hey, how did you know it was time? How do you decide when to give something back? That's cultural change. That's mentorship. That's how you shape a facility, not just through policy, but through presence. So, Russ, here's the question here. Have you seen restoration change inmates' behavior long-term? How do moments like that ripple outward through staff culture?
Okay, so I would say this is you, if you're expecting what you're doing to impact inmates long term, that just doesn't happen. And the reason that I say that is because that is not the population that we deal with. You got to understand that inmates by and large are almost all of them have antisocial criminal personality traits. One of those things is that we see a lot, and some are better and worse than others, is impulsivity. The other thing that we often see is they have a very difficult time doing anything or thinking about anything that's outside the range of the moment. That's why one of the things that, you have to take, instant corrective action on things they do. You can't just write up a charge a week later because now it's convenient for you. So thinking that it's a management strategy for long-term, behavior changes is not really realistic. Even within some of the things that I do right now, which is, rehabilitation and reentry and coping skills and things like that. Some of them do become capable, and they can act long term with regards to, maybe beating their addiction and things like that. But overall, it's just not a long term strategy. It's that we try and mill through it, by lather, rinse, repeat, lather, rinse, repeat, lather, rinse, repeat. And it's just kind of a strategy for, living and experiencing things shift to shift to shift, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. But what I'm talking about here is the long-term goal isn't about changing the behavior. It's about managing the behavior.
Yeah. And that's a difference to me. That's with respect to the words, you can manage it, and it happens over a long period of time, but you don't see, I don't see how you would ever see long-term change within your population. It's just not something they're capable of.
Well, no, so I agree with that. So guys, I agree with that, but this is more for the control of the management of the behavior. So it's the give and take. So okay. I think, yeah, if you're working in a unit right now, this is where it gets tough. A lot of rookies are put in units now where the inmates have nothing to lose. It's just they're working those close custody units. So they have to find a way to manage the behavior. So sometimes when they get in, they're in very reactionary mode. They're writing up every little thing, which doesn't work for these types of inmates, because these inmates, it's just, they want you to react that way. But they have nothing to lose. So with that said, the power comes from, how you strategically give things back to manage the behavior. Because what will happen here is the inmates will give the officer on the floor a very hard time, but then try to write to administration for things to be given back to them. Now, granted, at administration on a surface level, they may say, well, this inmate's not being charged, but that doesn't mean that the behavior isn't being managed. Not everything in those units lead to charges. So what I think management has to do is give that power of giving things back to the officer, so the officer has a long-term way of managing the behavior. So let me just make a correction here. I'm not talking about changing their behavior. I don't think that's in the officer's control. That's an outcome that's not up for the officer to produce, but the officer has to be able to produce the effort to manage the behavior, which means that anytime an inmate goes to circumvent the route by, I'm going to give this officer a hard time on the floor, but it's a closed custody unit, so they're not going to write me. So there's really going to be nothing on record, but I'm going to go ahead and talk to management saying, they're denying me this, they're denying me that, or, hey, I haven't been charged for a while, can I get this back? And it's like, no, you got to go back to your officer. You got to go back to your supervisors, because they're the ones that are in charge of giving you things back within that parameter of whatever the days may be, 30 days, 60 days. And outside of that, when it goes past that time frame, well, then obviously the sanction's done, you may get it back. But with that said, it's the effort to manage the behavior, because what's going to wind up happening if you don't allow the staff to have that discretion, that doesn't mean weakness, but if you don't allow the staff to have that, actually it's going to come into the next section. Discretion is not rule bending, it's rule mastery. If you don't allow the staff to have the ability to make that choice, and that's where supervisors or peers could also come in. Like if I see that Russ is constantly giving things back, what are you doing? You're killing me here. They weren't ready for that. So there's got to be definitely some communication here, but they have to have the ability to be able to make that decision at the lower level. That should not be a decision that's made at the higher level, because we are not going to know how complicated those inmates are to manage, because not everything in those units go on paper. But that actually brings us to our next part, Russ. This is where I want to make sure that the staff know that discretion is not rule bending, it's rule mastery. So let's be absolutely clear. Back end discretion is not favoritism. It's not going soft. It's not a shortcut. It is the most advanced form of rule application because it requires a deep understanding of policy, an accurate read on inmate behavior, and a clear plan for follow-up and consistency. So again, it's not long-term change, it's long-term management. It means you don't just enforce the rule book, you know when the rule has done its job and when to take the next step. That's the key. And when you say, I'm giving this back, don't make me regret it, it carries weight, because both sides know you're not guessing, you're leading. So again, in that context, Russ, why is it essential for leadership to publicly support back-end discretion when used properly? How does that build trust across the facility?
So, I think that I think you have to look at it from a little bit bigger viewpoint, and not just, focus on just the back end discretion. I think that you have to look at what the disciplinary policy as a whole does, because the disciplinary policy is not just about, a sanction. The disciplinary policy is about the leverage that you glean from it, because it's the potential to leverage a sanction. It's the potential to be able to cite it and say, no, it's not that I need permission from policy to tell an inmate no, but it is instructional to them to at least know that, hey, this is what I'm relying on to make this decision. And because about this policy, it gives us leverage to do the sanction should you break it. Everything that we do is about leverage, and it can't just be about, it can't just be about the punishment, because the punishment comes after the act. It's about, curbing behavior to a point where we can maybe become less reliant on the punishment itself. So it has to be about the totality of the policy, what it encompasses, and the amount of leverage that it gives us. Because once again, I say it's not just about the punishment. It's about, relying on it to be able to put it out there to the inmates so that they know there's going to be a consequence for something, but they also know what they can and can't do. But they also maybe are, advised of, how they can regain control of their property, or their whatever, what's the word I'm looking for, or whatever it is that they've lost, their ability to have night yard, their privileges. So that's the way we have to look at it. We can't just look at it from it's only discretionary at the point at which we give things back. It's also discretionary by allowing us to leverage individuals by pointing those things out. And so I know I had to broaden things out, but that's kind of what I wanted to say.
No, it makes sense, because I think this is a tool. I think when you have to manage, this more goes. So guys, even when we had this discussion from reactionary, the shift, all the way to reputation, I think this is where we're at, how do you manage inmates ultimately that have nothing to lose? So this is where you have to become extremely resourceful. And then you have to look at, it is by some level of controlling the give back, because that is a resource. If it's strategically used, it's 100% a resource. But like Russ mentioned, if you're being manipulated and you're giving it back too early, you're killing it. You're killing the accountability. You're killing. A senior officer should know. I wish we had them more to model from, the perfect timing for this, because they know the inmates. They know how this world works. They know what's good enough for one inmate may not be good enough for another. There are some inmates that 5 days could be enough because maybe mental health, whatever it is, and there are some that need longer, and they look for signs that it's working. But with that said, I think this is a resource that should be utilized, but it's also misunderstood. It's misunderstood on how powerful of an impact it is. And I actually kind of really embraced it now because, again, a lot of the rookies right now are managing inmates right now that have nothing to lose. So, again, this is just a tool to establish control. That's all it is. It's, again, not to change, but to maintain control of that behavior. All right. So next one we got is, we're almost wrapping up here. I just want to go over just a quick couple sentences here. The officer's inner dialogue has evolved. So now you got, I'm not rushing decisions. I'm reading the room. I'm not giving anything away. I'm investing in the control of behavior. My presence carries weight. My decision sets the tone, and I've earned that. So now, what leadership can do at this stage. Once an officer reaches this level, the role of leadership shifts too. It's no longer about coaching compliance. It's about positioning influence. Here's how supervisors and administrators can support. First, affirm wise discretion, especially when something is restored early. Show that you noticed and, if you support the call or not. Use their judgment as a teaching tool. Ask them to talk through their process in roll calls or mentorship settings. Let them lead informally. Pair them with newer staff. Put them on special posts. Invite them into unit-level conversations about strategy. And publicly recognize evolution. Say it outright. You've gone from enforcing to anchoring. That's leadership stripes or not. Okay, so Russ, here's your question. It's the last question, Russ. How can leadership harness the influence of officers who've reached this level without putting pressure on them to do everything? What's the balance between recognition and over-reliance?
I mean, it's really, I'm trying to think what a good analogy is. Basically, there has to be a growth stimulus, and that's what we're getting to. The bigger you grow the plant, the more it can do, the more it can produce. The more it becomes a resource. We want people to become resources, and not just at the level of, hey, they're responding to an incident. We want people to be able to, have the full, balanced, rounded approach to that. So we have to provide that growth stimulus for them. And the way that we do that is by bringing them into these discussions, by calling on them, by giving them, tasks, that they have to complete, things that they have to do. And we have to, constantly be stressing them to the point that there's actual growth there. Not everybody is that person that wants to raise their hand and be uncomfortable. But what we do want to do is point that out to them, say, hey, you know what, you need to, get outside your skin a little bit, expose yourself to some of the stress, become inoculated to it, and then be able to deal with it better so that the next level of stress that you encounter feels a little bit less, but you're still growing. And your current level of stressors that are acting on you just seem like, oh, that's nothing. Bringing people to that point is a real art. And it's something that, I want rookies to realize that they should always be holding their hand up. They should always be seeking that, that stress growth stimulus in order to, constantly be evolving to the point that they can get at, where we're talking about this, where it's how can leadership harness the influence of these officers? And that's how we do it, is by, giving them that model, showing them what it's like to, have to take on things that are outside of our comfort zone, and being able to, constantly have that, that growth stimulus, affecting us so that our experience deepens, our skill sets, are increased and polished, and that we're able to take on new and novel levels of responsibility and duties. We want that to always be the thing that's the proof of the pudding. When I can take on more novel, duties and responsibilities, it's proof that I'm growing within my professional capacity.
Yeah, and I think at this point there is guiding from a distance where the officer again feels safe to make decisions, but also empowered. And I think we covered a lot about this question also earlier in the dialogue, so I don't want to revisit what we already discussed. And I love what Russ just did as well to complement what we discussed. And the last part here is summary: presence to purpose. By this point, the officer is no longer defined by how often they enforce; they're defined by how well they lead. They become a force of stability, not because they're loud, not because they're feared, but because they are trusted. They no longer write charges to stay in control. They manage behavior with intention. They no longer avoid conflicts. They select their response with purpose. And they no longer lean on the badge because now their presence is the badge. They are no longer just enforcing rules. They're shaping the culture around them. And that is what separates the officers who survive the job from the officers who change it. Guys, before we get to our closing comment, the next show or the next episode or the next training will be about the spectrum of growth. So it's a process and not a switch. So basically, the summary for the next show is going to be: nobody wakes up seasoned. Experience isn't measured in time; it's measured in transformation. And we're going to go over the steps towards that transformation. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say? Yeah, that's going to be a good one, and maybe we can knock it out. I'm on your availability. Hey, Russ, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would just say this is that, the growth of our rookies, a lot of it is on them, but a lot of it, is on us too. If we're not giving them the tools, the resources, the training, and that growth stimulus now, which we're going to obviously talk about a lot in the next one, then why would we expect them ever to develop? Why would we expect them to take on, new and novel, responsibilities and duties? So, these are all things that, the people in charge should be looking toward. I mean, after all, they're the ones that are, hiring these people. These are the ones that are, deciding where people are going to be trained, where they're going to work, all of that, be engaged in the process. One of the things that, even at my level as, just a sergeant or even just as an officer is, bringing those, people under our wing and trying to provide to them, knowledge, wisdom, insight, and the ability and opportunity for practical application. And everyone should be viewing it that way, because that's how people really truly are developed and cultivated, and not just left to grow on their own.
Love it. And guys, again, this is a series of videos. We will be doing, this will be part 5 will be coming up because we've done 4 already. So looking forward to doing that one with Russ. And as always, guys, stay safe. See you in the next video.